The story begins with a little girl arriving at the estate. The butler greets her warmly. The man emphasizes that she is welcome at the estate of the noble Archduke Blackwell. The newly arrived guest was called Laria Sherwood. She felt that everything was happening just like in a novel, the author of which she herself was in a past life. Now, the girl had arrived at the estate of her lover. And although Laria herself loved Archduke Blackwell very much, he paid no attention to her at all and tried in every way to avoid her company, forcing the girl to constantly run after him. The lover repeatedly asked him to stop and think about it, finally choosing her as his companion for the future. But her proposal remained unheard, and her feelings remained unanswered. But over time, his position changed. The boy cried. Tears streamed down his face, and the Archduke asked why she had hurt him in such a way and mocked his feelings. The butler pulled Laria out of her thoughts. He and the young lady stood in front of the door of the office, where the Archduke was personally present. He had been expecting to meet his guest for a long time and was even starting to get a little nervous about it. The man asked the guest if she was ready to come in. After all, such a visit could easily cause anxiety and worry, so they could wait. Laria replied that she was ready, mentally gathering her strength. The butler introduced her to the Archduke. He replied that he was tired of waiting, but it was time to finally start the interview and talk about everything the guest and job applicant had brought to him. At the same time, Laria thought about the fact that this young man was the main male character in the novel she had written. Everyone considered him a cold-blooded monster who did not deserve sympathy and understanding. Many even called him a monster who killed his own father. The young man was indeed very cruel. He propagated the idea that one should not feel mercy towards anyone in this noisy world. His name was Nocton Blackwell, a scion and heir of a famous noble family, and a powerful warrior and knight. But the main thing was that he was the main character of a novel written by Lady Laria herself. According to the plot, he was supposed to meet a holy virgin during his journey to the Holy Land. It was there that their complex and romantic relationship would begin. The love story in this novel was unique. Lady Laria, the author of the work, took for herself the role of the main antagonist, and she had to do everything she could to prevent the romantic feelings of the two main characters of the novel. Laria did this not just because she loved Nocton very much. The girl was ready for almost everything for her lover. She simply could not imagine her life without him. But the young man paid little attention to her, and her feelings remained unanswered by him. Time and again, she suffered from the fact that the lovers remained together. But when they finally decided to be together, the girl almost went crazy from the news of their union. After that, she still did not give up hope of getting her way. She tried to ruin their relationship, which ultimately caused Nocton's displeasure and anger, and she died at his hands. But the biggest shock came to her when she woke up in Laria's body. She simply couldn't believe her eyes. At first, it seemed like she was just dreaming, and that this horror would soon end. For a long time, she did not want to leave her room, closing herself off from the world. The girl wanted to achieve her quick demise and the end of this life, which brought only misfortune. The maids were surprised by this behavior of the young lady. After all, nothing like this had been noticed about her before. She now became completely withdrawn and tried to avoid the company of any of her acquaintances. In turn, her closest circle hesitated whether to try to help her. In the end, everyone agreed that it was not worth touching her because she herself should have asked them for help and support. Laria herself thought that life had been unfair to her, and it's worth thinking from the very beginning about how she could have angered the higher powers who had put their efforts into this. Suddenly, she realized one day that she should simply avoid the Archduke's company, and then she would remain unknown and in the shadows. That way, her life would be safe, and she would hold on. In addition, Her knowledge of the plot of the novel was added. She will be able to safely avoid all sorts of unpleasant and dangerous situations. Nocturne will remain alone or will look for someone else for love. Knowing about the plot of the book, the girl will try to change Laria's life. Sherwood for the better and just enjoy life. But things didn't go as planned. Her perfect plan began to unravel. One morning, the girl went down to the kitchen as usual. There were already many people there, all of them looking dignified and slowly eating their breakfast, not paying any attention to the lady or being distracted. The mother told the girl that she was very late. Laria tried to reply that she wished everyone a good morning, but her mother assured her that she shouldn't do that after such a huge delay. The woman continued to say that the girl had begun to show her character and temper at an early age. She had thereby disrespected her family and loved ones, and had hurt her father, who works for her and the family. Finally, the mother calmed down and ordered the girl to go to the kitchen and start eating breakfast. The brothers silently watched this strange scene, which had not happened often between mother and sister before. Nothing strange in this for Laria herself, because she wrote about it in a book. At such a moment, a woman could sometimes try to instruct her and teach her the rules of life. The girl obediently sat down next to her older brother. Laria understood the reason for her brother's laughter, who began to mock loudly when she tried a piece from his bowl. The boy had specially salted it and wanted to joke with her and make her laugh. All this, as well as the day that followed, were ordinary things for the girl. After all, she herself wrote about them in the novel and knew about all the relationships between the main characters during this dialogue and subsequent everyday situations. The maid cautiously advised her mistress to eat lightly and not to rush. After all, she had not eaten anything for a long time, and therefore it might harm her at first. The girl was grateful for the care and good attitude. But then, something happened that put a crack in her beautiful, reliable plan. The girl tried buckwheat, and an allergy broke out on her face. The girl thought that there was actually a whole world around her. The doctor, who came very quickly, ordered to simply eliminate buckwheat from the diet, and the allergic reaction would never bother the girl. The mother and brothers began to persuade the girl again that she was stupid. The brother walked around the hall complaining to everyone about how stupid his sister was. The mother simply advised her to be more careful about what her daughter ate and drank, because lately she didn't look like herself at all. Laria herself thought that in the novel she was not allergic to foods. The girl thought that this is real life around her, and she should be more careful about what she does. The maid, who was left alone with the mistress, said that she was very surprised when she asked for biscuits. After all, she had already tried them a long time ago, after which the girl felt very sick and fell ill. It was all very different from what was written in the novel. After all, the girl could not actually remember anything like this from her character's life. Many things seemed strange and unusual. Laria recalled that her literary character was very impudent, and always, after causing some trouble and intrigues for the Archduke and his lover, she would return to the estate surrounded by roses. The author even remembered when describing the moment when Laria danced alone among these fiery red roses. But now, not a single flower was visible from her window. It was no longer about roses. From the very beginning, the main character didn't pay attention to what was going on around her. She focused a lot of her attention on simply getting used to this place. However, now she was starting to understand the reality of everything. The girl also guessed that, from a certain point on, the story began to develop on its own, and events were very different from what happened to the characters in the book and the novel. So, she could meet the Archduke at any moment. And secondly, her death could also be waiting for her literally around the corner. This really scared the girl very much, but she tried not to think about the bad. The solution could be the diary that Laria kept. She thought that the last entries might shed light on what her heroine was doing. After that, she had to do something to put things in order. Thus, she would cling to the smallest details of her past in order to build a future and avoid the terrible participation. That anxiety was hard to ignore, and it distracted from reflection. Finally, the girl found the diary. But the maid's voice disturbed her. The servant reported that a man had arrived who said he had a task to take Laria with him. Sure would. He said nothing more. The guess as to who this person could have come from pinned the girl to the spot. Only the Archduke could have sent for her, so the meeting had to take place very quickly and bear unexpected fruits for this. This news forced Laria to quickly flip through the diary so that the entries would allow her to reconstruct the events of the past months and shed light on the details of their relationship with Nocton so that she could plan something. The main character's story in this world was very different from the one she lived in reality. Her father didn't care about her, and her stepmother only scolded and mocked her for everything, always. Her own brother paid no attention to her. There was no question of him trying to protect her, but her stepbrother constantly tried to quarrel with her and make her parents' anger flare up against her and make her guilty of everything. It was difficult for her to live in this house. But one day she found an advertisement in the newspaper that the Blackwell family was looking for a nanny for their children. It was a great idea to get out. Laria thought that if she could get a job with this family, she could live independently and not depend on her parents. Unfortunately, she had no experience working with children as a nanny or governess. But the girl still decided to create a resume and write it to the Blacktons. After all, there were cases when girls without the appropriate education were sent to the families of rich people and taught their children and heirs there. Laria was still thinking about how the novel she had written had changed so much. Everything she had written about had changed. Meanwhile, the maid asked permission to enter the room and help her mistress. While the maid helped to hide her allergy with powder, the girl thought about whether she would be able to refuse His Majesty the Archduke if she noticed that something was clearly not going as the situation demanded. But the voice of reason indicated that she shouldn't avoid this meeting. After all, she would have to talk to Noctono anyway. And after the conversation, she would think about how to live on. Laria had already decided to go to the man who had arrived for her when her stepmother and brothers met her in the hallway. This meeting did not bode well, but it was not worth showing her displeasure. It was a young man. The girl said she was ready, but the stepmother said it was not the time because she wanted to talk to her herself. The woman asked the guest if he would mind letting her go for a few minutes. The stepmother was most interested in where the messenger from the Archduke's family had come to this house from. The woman could not believe that her stepdaughter had sent her resume in order to fill a vacant position. Laria thought that there would be such a reaction, but now she was deciding what to do. After all, the first option was to simply apologize. But the girl really didn't want to do that. The girl said that she did it so that no one would have the right to point out to her that she didn't do anything. After all, she was tired of constantly feeling guilty and obligated to someone. The brother and stepmother tried to prove something to the girl, but she said that she was tired of living in a way where everyone accused her of something. However, her decision remains final and unchangeable. Her brother tried to pressure her that she shouldn't make such a decision on her own. But the girl replied that up until that moment, they had no business at all, and they didn't pay any attention to her at all. The young man is still trying to convey to her that her decision not only affects her life, but also affects their entire family and the future well-being of these people. Laria is not going to change her decision. The messenger heard a loud conversation. He could not imagine what was so important being discussed there. The girl was refused, on the grounds that her mistake in the Archduke's house would disgrace the entire family and the entire state. Laria decides that the conversation can be ended. After all, She is not going to listen to those who are trying to refuse her only for the sake of their own safety and well being and good position. Finally, Loria goes down with a suitcase of things to the messenger, who is tired of waiting for the girl. The girl suspected that she might soon return to this house, but this time she has marked her boundaries. Today's conversation was supposed to be a lesson for the girl's relatives. From this day forward, they should let go of her with their fears and timid thoughts that have kept them within certain stereotypes and prohibitions throughout their lives. Finally, her younger half-brother met her. He asked where the girl was going. His heart ached at the thought of being without her company for the next few days. Laria asked the messenger to ignore her family. It seems like they've collectively started to lose their minds, but in reality, they're very good at hiding the fact that they're assholes and bad people. But the boy was determined. He didn't want to let the girl go and tried to stop her in every way possible so that she wouldn't go anywhere. The messenger also didn't like the fact that his relatives were trying to get in the way of his task. When Loraya left the estate, she felt that the whole family was standing on the threshold, carefully examining her back. The girl did not even intend to turn around and say goodbye as she should have done. After all, they did not bother her. The girl was soon going through an interview at the Archduke's estate. There, she was asked many questions, and she modestly and without unnecessary words told everything that interested her future employer and recruiter. The young man was very polite. He asked if it had been difficult to get to his estate, and Laria replied that the carriage he had sent in time had made the journey completely imperceptible to her and her companion, the messenger servant. The girl actually thought that she would never have guessed that fate would give her a chance to see the character of her novel, but she was even more amazed by what a handsome man she was able to create with the power of her own thoughts and words. Finally, Nocton announced that he had finished reading the girl's resume. His opinion was that the document belonged in the trash. These words shocked the girl very much and made her tremble with fear of returning. But Nocton said that despite all the nonsense the girl wrote in the letter, he was interested in her ability to solve problems, even of a physical nature. So in any case, she was hired for a probationary period. These words really hurt Laria. Before her transformation, she had worked as a kindergarten teacher for a long time, and the hints that she wouldn't be able to handle the kids for some reason really offended her and hurt her pride. She couldn't stand it and said that before that, she could easily cope with a dozen children. And now there will be only two. So she doesn't see this as something grandiose for her in terms of work and workload. But he didn't need to know that. After all, that would raise a lot of questions. So the best option was to pretend to be the girl she had painstakingly described in her resume. Nocton had to believe that. Laria tried to talk about giving her a chance to work in the position she was applying for, but the Archduke said he was not ready for such an adventure regarding children. So his opinion changes completely now, and the girl should rest after hard work, after which he is going to send her home because her candidacy has been completely rejected and her answer is negative. But for some reason, despite the idea of returning to her family, the girl was glad to be returning to herself. After all, the conversation indicated that Nocton was not interested in her person and she could live freely. Now the girl believed that she could safely begin planning her comfortable existence in the future. After all, the family's money and wealth partly belonged to her. So much awaited her in the future. The maid was leading the girl through the palace, and she couldn't help but be happy that she finally didn't have to worry about how her future would turn out. Suddenly, a strange sound caught her attention. Someone was crying and asking for help. It was a child's voice, and the girl turned to see who was crying. The adult's voice asked the young gentleman to calm down. He continued to say that this time he would forgive the prank again. Behind the door, The child and the adult continued to talk. Laria remembered the methods of upbringing of aristocrats in this world. After all, they were often physically punished for the slightest misdeeds and unworthy actions. The girl could not bear it. She left the servant who was escorting her and ran in the direction from which the voices came. She soon found the necessary door and thought about what she would say to the adult who was mocking her. Behind the door, she saw two children, a boy and a girl. A woman in a strict dress stood next to them. Laria wondered what was going on here. The woman was trying her best to whip the poor children. The girl stood between the children and the woman, who was again trying to point her finger at them. Laria ordered them to stop bullying the children. The nanny asked what the stranger was up to and what right she had to do so. The guest answered who she was and who she was trying to become in this house. But the woman was not going to talk about it. After all, this could give the impression that the guest was trying to show her the right way. But the girl objected. She simply could not believe that a woman could allow children to be abused like this. After all, they were very scared, and it seemed that this was not the first time they had been treated like this. The little one held the hand he was heaving at. It seemed to be on fire, and the boy thought that the woman would hit him on the fingers again. The little one said that he had been punished for spilling tea. The same thing happened to his little sister. Laria thought that this was really a cruel measure of upbringing. A woman should have a heart, otherwise she could not act so harshly against her own pupils. The governess, in turn, was waiting for an explanation. Laria took the little one in her arms. She asked to stop bullying the little ones. And first of all, it is necessary to provide first aid to the boy, who was very scared and simply could not even say a word. The governess was not going to do that. She did not want to give up control over the little ones and the situation. The woman said that it was not worth seeking a doctor for a simple burn and bothering him over a trifle. Laria was told to leave before she had any problems, because the owner might soon find out what the girl was doing while he was away. The girl said that she was not going to just skip her upbringing because of such cruel methods. But the woman still thought that the girl was interfering where she had no business and permission. Laria insisted that the boy be sent to a doctor for treatment, and if she did not help him at the first opportunity, she would definitely be punished. During the conversation, they felt the presence of Nocton. He ordered her to explain what was happening. After all, their quarrel could be heard at the other end of the estate. The woman was trying to deceive her master and say that the girl had interfered where she shouldn't have gone. Laria insisted, and soon she was at the doctor's. The doctor praised the girl for reacting in time. The man said that if it had happened a little later, the little one could have even lost his fingers. Nocton praised the girl for her timely reaction, but he was curious about how she had interfered in the internal affairs of the estate where she was a guest. Laria couldn't even think of a decent answer. The girl replied that she was outraged by the governess's methods of upbringing. Although she had the goodwill of her master to use such a thing, it could have a bad influence on the girl and the boy. The girl also understood that the woman had not been given permission to do such a thing. Nocton was against his children being tried to be raised and punished in this way for some ordinary, innocent offense. It was time to meet the children. The boy was called Michal, and the little girl, beautiful as a doll, was called Janet. Nocton was not their father. Their biological father was the Archduke's bitter enemy, whom he hated. But it so happened that the man died, and his wife soon died in childbirth. She left behind two children, a boy and a girl. Nocton decided to take the little ones and raise them as his own children. Because of their work, they rarely met. The little ones did not require much attention, but they did not need anything. The Archduke cared for the children as if they were his own heirs and relatives. Therefore, There was a possibility that he would take appropriate measures to punish the governess for her bad attitude towards the little ones. But Laria was the first to apologize for interfering in her own business. The girl said that she could not ignore such bad treatment of children. She saw, or rather first heard, that the nanny was talking to the child, who asked not to hurt her for spilling tea. The woman was not going to admit her guilt. She also believed that the beatings were not cruel in any way, and the young lady would have no idea how to properly raise children and instill values in them. But as a confident and experienced tutor, the woman did not believe she had done anything wrong. She insisted that the punishment fully corresponded to the child's actions and misdemeanors and his carelessness. The girl continued to insist that although she had no experience, she could completely distinguish between discipline and ordinary beatings. She did not write this point in the novel, but she was sure of it. If you beat a child from the very beginning, they might believe that they deserve such treatment after everything that happened to them. But for a long time, the little ones simply kept quiet and endured the beatings on their own skin. But it should have been known that over time, such an attitude would only worsen the situation. After all, the child would start to be afraid and would be ready to shift the responsibility onto someone else to lie about other children. At a young age, children are generally very vulnerable to this kind of punishment. Therefore, from childhood, they may perceive beatings and bullying as something that only prevents them from living and existing normally. The girl told all this to the teacher and the Archduke, arguing that in the future, such methods would only cause the opposite feelings and experiences in young children, to provoke them. Noctum listened to her and agreed. He emphasized that the young lady was considering everything that had happened quite logically. Her view was somewhat different from the views on upbringing that prevailed in aristocratic society. However, certain words did cause him internal resistance. He could not agree with them because of a certain anachronism. Many nannies and tutors would disagree with her methods of raising and working with children. Molly, that was the name of the woman who had hit Mikhail on the arm, was considered the best tutor, recommended everywhere, and famous throughout the empire. So she had every right to do so. The Archduke insisted that the woman had raised a number of children from aristocratic families. So it was not worth pointing out to her the correctness of the selection of upbringing methods. A professional could not make a mistake, and the use of physical punishment was considered a norm of upbringing in their lands and corresponded to the current values of society. So the young man certainly did not see this as a reason for concern for himself. The doctor carried the little gentleman out in his arms. He said that there were a lot of wounds on the little man's body, and not all of them were inflicted so that he could study better or learn the rules of etiquette. After all, he would still be beaten. The man also asked if there was really a need for this kind of punishment. After all, the little one simply didn't hold the cup properly. Laria couldn't believe that such wounds had been inflicted over such a small matter. The doctor pointed to little Nocton's hand and asked if he would really say that such an upbringing took place in the civilized world, and in the house of His Majesty, the Archduke Blackwell, the eminent defender. Fragments of his life flashed through the young man's mind, filled with conversations with relatives who asked him to put aside pity and weakness so that he could have the opportunity to glorify his lineage and family. That was the end of the conversation. He asked the doctor to take the children to their rooms and make sure they rested after such a busy day. And he would have a separate conversation with the teacher. He advised Molly to avoid such punishments in the future, as they certainly do not reflect the seriousness of the act of a little boy who suffered only because of his own carelessness and recklessness. As for Laria, the Archduke promised not to hold her accountable, but to allow her to peacefully return to her family after what happened on his estate and after her arbitrary interference in her upbringing. The girl was upset. After all, in this case, her beliefs were rejected only because the teacher had more experience. She was very hurt by the fact that the children would continue to be bullied. Molly, who was passing by the girl, touched her shoulder on purpose to show that it was not worth struggling with her and trying to resist her. The advantage of the governess in this case was clear and undeniable. The girl thought that the children should not suffer because of her pride. In the meantime, the doctor should take care of them so that they would not suffer even more. He clearly supported her position on punishment. Laria thought that many might think that she was actually sticking her head where it shouldn't be. But the girl simply couldn't accept the strict attitude and the appropriateness of its use. The girl also felt very hurt by the fact that in her past life, she was in the place of these little ones. Her older brother constantly teased her and gave her no peace because of her appearance and her proportions. And no one dared to stand up for her. And her brother constantly mocked and beat her severely because, according to him, she was more like a pig. His words hurt no less than the physical violence. Often, after another beating, the girl thought about whether she really deserved such treatment and why she was being treated this way. Would her entire future life become a struggle for existence with such tyrants? Now she began to understand that her early childhood experiences had contributed to her prescribing the same fate for the boy in her novel. She felt embarrassed because she was the one to blame for everything that was happening. The children were victims of the governess, and Nocton didn't care. No one could understand the Archduke and his motives. Because of his upbringing, the young man could not treat anyone kindly. He had been taught that long ago. Seeing the horror that the lives of the characters in her novel had become, the girl began to think that God had sent her here for a reason. He had made her see all this and fix the situation, save everyone. The author had to use her heroine's powers to correct the situation and bring everyone to a happy ending. Laria opened the door to the corridor and called out to the Archduke, who was moving down the corridor and trying to disappear. The young man returned when Laria called him. She asked not to send her home. The girl insisted that he give her a chance to improve the lives of the children. Otherwise, she would feel guilty and suffer. The girl promised that the result would be visible very quickly, and she would not make the nobleman regret what she would do with the little ones during her very short stay in the castle as a nanny or governess. The young man replied that they had already discussed this issue, and his interlocutor probably had a very bad memory since she could not recall it. There was no reason to do such a thing. Laria said that what she saw convinced her that she was the kind of nanny his children needed. Nocton had never expressed any expectations about the kind of nanny his children needed. The girl was convinced that she was the perfect candidate for the role of his tutor. After all, Molly knew and used outdated methods of raising and influencing children. It's worth just trying. Laria regretted what she had said a little. After all, she had no idea how people were raised and what was taught in this world. After all, knowledge from a past life might not be suitable. But there was an obstacle in that the girl didn't know how to convince him to hire her. Laria thought she could use the facts from her book that she could still remember, but that wasn't reliable. The girl asked if he really wanted to condemn his children to the same suffering that he himself had been subjected to in childhood by his own family and relatives. After all, such a fate was prepared for his children if he did not change his mind. The young man was angry at such language. He said that now he knew where his interlocutor had gotten such information from. After all, he began to guess her true intentions and why she was so certain. Nocton leaned over the girl and said that he would not allow himself to be blackmailed and controlled through threats. And if Laria continued to do this or tried to scare him, he would pay. The girl was not scared. He reacted as she expected. After all, when reminded of certain facts from his past, the young man began to get very angry. This trait was characteristic of him from the very beginning of the novel. So it's worth making sure that this reaction primarily affects him. The girl said that since childhood, he has been forced to act in this way because he didn't receive a single drop of sympathy from his parents and relatives. The young man is now trying to raise his children in the same way he was raised. He didn't know what maternal love was and therefore couldn't understand his own motives. With his attitude, he's trying to turn his children away from him. But you can't do that to children. They should understand from childhood that a helping hand will always be extended to them. There will always be someone who will be able to understand the little ones and respond adequately to them when needed. A child will be able to grow up to be a normal person without complexes and problems only when there is an appropriate environment around them, in which they will be loved and protected from everything bad and negative from outside. The girl said that this is her approach. And while Molly is simply a well-deserved and experienced educator, Laria is more focused on helping children develop and grow personally as real people. The Archduke finally gave in. He said he was curious to see how much truth there was in her words. He was going to give the young girl a chance to see the effectiveness of her approach and methods of upbringing. Nocton agreed. He gave the girl a 2-week trial period. If during that time she did not convince him of the need for him to hire her, the retribution for her audacity would be very tangible. The girl convinced her that she would make an excellent nanny. After which, the maid soon took her to the room where Laria was to live and spend the night during breaks between studies for the next 2 weeks. Laria next was called Mary. She gave the impression of a well-bred girl who could be relied on and trusted in case of need. After all, events could develop in different ways. Mary asked if her temporary housekeeper wanted to take a break from the road. After all, she could bring her something to eat or prepare the bathroom. Laria refused, instead asking if she could ask something. But even with that, she decided to wait for the guest. The first thing to do was to establish contact with the children. This will be the key to further success in the difficult task that the new nanny will try to implement. They were both quite wary so far, which was to be expected after all of Mrs. Molly's classes. So Laria asked if they wanted to eat now and start getting to know her. Mary said that Molly didn't let the children eat again because everything had to follow a strict schedule she had planned. But the nanny asked them to do it just this once, to cheer up the little ones after the shock. Laria understood perfectly well that eating delicious food and sitting together at the table could greatly contribute to establishing friendly relations between people. The children also liked this idea very much. They were happy. The teacher assured her that she had ordered the servants to prepare sweets and desserts so that the 3 of them could have a quiet chat and get to know each other, and the children were free to take whatever they wanted. The girl also advised to relax, because this time no one will be punished for how they hold the cup, and there is no need to worry about someone breaking a cookie or something like that. The little one immediately took the oat cookies. Laria said she liked them too. The little one still couldn't believe that now they would be allowed to do everything as they wanted, and no one would scold them for the slightest mistake. Everything went very smoothly, and Laria invited a maid to the table because she didn't feel comfortable standing on the sidelines and watching everyone around her savor the sweets and have fun. In the future, Laria constantly tried to work on ensuring that the children trusted her and that peaceful and open relationships were established between them, built on trust and the right attitude towards each other and the nanny in general. But the main and most effective way was to attend Molly's classes with them so that the woman would no longer have the opportunity to beat and bully the little ones, curbing her angry nature. The teacher continued to treat and educate the young children as if they were already teenagers. Her methods were not adequate for the age her pupils were at. They could not fully comprehend everything despite their intelligence. The girl also noticed that after talking to Nocton, there was an order of magnitude less physical punishment. Perhaps the girl could be fooling herself, but she believed that she had done a lot for her pupils. The time would soon come when her methods would be recognized by the Archduke and she would be given a job as a nanny. After that, she would do her utmost to improve the relationship between the children and the Duke, to set them on the right path. And she also began to think about improving the relationship between the main character of the novel and Nocton. In this case, all her problems would disappear by themselves, and Laria would be able to live peacefully and enjoy life. It was the 10th day of Laria's work as a nanny. She could not get the little master to sleep. The girl insisted that he should sleep so that he could become like the Archduke and resemble him. The nanny also pointed to the young housekeeper as a model of behavior. After all, the girl had brushed her teeth and already gone to bed. She was only waiting for someone to read her a fairy tale, and she slept peacefully. The girl heard from Mikhail that when they go to bed and Laria goes to her room, Molly comes in and starts telling them all sorts of dirty stories and all sorts of bad things, scaring the children. The girl tried to shut her brother up so that he wouldn't say anything more. But Mikhail wasn't going to keep quiet. He got tired of enduring it, and he told her about the strange tea Molly gave them every night. The sister realized that there was nothing more to hide. She added that when they didn't even want to drink it, the woman would always bring it to him and force him to drink it. After that, the boy would sleep poorly or wouldn't sleep at all. The girl wondered what strange drink the servant would give them. After all, the strange feeling did not leave her after she drank it. Fortunately, the nurse stopped giving it to the girl when she said it made her sick. Molly constantly emphasized that her tea was very beneficial for the human body, and the people around her would not be able to recognize the young gentleman after he started drinking the tea on a regular basis. Laria wondered why, in this case, the teacher forbade talking about the fact that the little one was drinking that tea. After all, she herself emphasized that it was useful. The children asked not to tell anyone. Laria promised to keep it a secret because she couldn't let the tutor defeat her just yet. In the meantime, the girl went to the doctor to consult with him about the tea and its effects. He immediately recognized the description of the drink, which was usually called a work night drink. It was consumed by those who worked at night, who needed an extra boost of energy and vigor in the evening and throughout the night. The girl realized that this tea was something like coffee. That was why he didn't want to sleep. After all, the drink gave him strength that didn't give him peace and needed to be embodied and used somewhere. The doctor asked why the nanny was interested in it. She replied that she had been advised to use it to boost her energy and performance. She simply asked if it was beneficial for the child's body and what effect it had. The doctor indignantly said that it was not even worth thinking about such a thing. After all, it would be the worst thing that could be done to a child. Such experiments would definitely not end in anything good, but would only do harm. The man added that in large quantities, this tea is not very good for the heart, even for an adult. You shouldn't even think about giving a child with goiter such a drink if an adult is interested in their condition. The girl went into the kitchen. She could not understand the reasons that prompted Molly to give a drink that could even cause a little boy to stop breathing. Laria wanted to check the kitchen. The new nanny wouldn't be surprised if Molly, who had raised her hand against the children, could have done much worse things to them. But with no evidence in her hands, the girl could prove nothing. Guilt would be unproven. Suddenly, she heard Nocton's voice behind her. He asked what the girl was doing. He said that he had heard some suspicious noises in the kitchen, so he decided to check the premises, since the staff had long since left. The young man asked if the girl was really taking advantage of her situation and stealing food. Laria felt very offended, but she knew that without evidence, she couldn't tell the whole story about the reasons that brought her here. The girl replied that she was not in a position to discuss it now. They would have to return to this conversation later. But Nocton stopped her. He demanded an explanation right now because there was plenty of time. The conversation with His Highness prevented me from thinking about the fact that Molly was going to come here soon. The woman was standing on the threshold. She was carefully examining the kitchen. Not noticing anyone, she went on. The girl and Nocton stood silently in the room. Molly did not notice their presence, and the nanny asked her boss to keep quiet and find out what the tutor was really hiding and what had brought her here. Meanwhile, Molly held a jar of something in her hands. She talked to herself, trying to explain the reasons why she had to prevent such a method, dangerous for the little one's life. The woman put the kettle on. Soon she would have to make the drink that Mikhail was going to visit. Molly also said that the new nanny had been bothering her all this time and trying to get in her way. But now she had an extraordinary plan for getting rid of her rival. Soon, Nocton would be heartbroken, and she would take advantage of it to chase away the young woman. The Duke and Laria also heard that from the very beginning, the nanny was simply trying to ruin the relationship between the children and Nocton. But now her plan has become more cruel. She will make him suffer and torment. The girl could hold it no longer. She threw the door of her hiding place open sharply and shouted for the intruder to stop. Nocton followed this line of conduct as well. The woman asked what they were both doing at such an hour. But the Duke was no longer going to listen to her. He was now more interested in what she was trying to achieve. Her explanations interested him more as information. Molly tried to convince her master that she had misunderstood everything, but he emphasized that all this time behind his back, she had been plotting something bad and unworthy against him and his children. He also knew from the smell that she had been making that special tea. The woman tried to make excuses, but the young man now guessed the reasons why Mikhail had been sleeping so poorly and behaving strangely during the day. Laria asked the woman why she was forcing the young master to drink tea, which had a negative effect on his body and could ultimately lead to a fatal outcome. Molly wasn't going to hide it any longer. She knew the moment had come when everything would be decided. So she simply asked angrily how the girl had known about the nanny's use of tea. The tutor emphasized that the entire blame would lie on the shoulders of the Blackwell family. After all, it is they who genetically transmit a disease that provokes uncontrolled anger. This happens when a woman is next to Blackwell. The novel also described something similar, but Nocton was an exception. When his beloved was near him, the symptoms of this disease became completely invisible or disappeared altogether, leaving no trace of themselves. Only the large amount of blood he personally shed could calm Blackwell, who was possessed by a fit. For Nocton himself, such episodes were akin to a nightmare and a living horror. The heroine understood that she had given the Duke's family this trait at a time when she herself felt broken and inferior. She could not have known what dangerous consequences this could lead to. Molly told how her sister once witnessed such madness, after which the unfortunate woman began to suffer from a nervous illness. And although she was not physically injured, it had a great impact on her. The poor sister eventually lost her mind, and Molly had to take care of the poor thing every day. In time, she got very tired of it because she was young herself and wasting her years on such things, which she regretted. The woman insisted that the Duke had contributed to her broken fortune. The girl thought that Nocton could not buy off her with his dirty money. After all, compared to life, it was rubbish. The young man began to get angry, but Laria stood up for him, understanding that he might explode with anger now. So she asked the woman if she really wanted to avenge her sister or if she was repressing her anger. The next day, many letters arrived from Laria's family. The girl did not expect that they would write to her with such enthusiasm. One of the letters was addressed to Maria Owen. The maid said that it was her friend. Now Laria announced that the poor girl's suffering would soon be over. The girl emphasized that she now regularly corresponded with her former friend and partner. The girl wrote to Mary that over time, she had pulled herself together and refused to carry the pain of the past. Mary had made a strong willed act, and now she was thinking about going back to work. Molly should have known that over time, the suffering of her family becomes more unbearable than the suffering of the victims themselves. And over time, she simply decided to use this for revenge. The angry woman shouted at the girl and tried to hit her, but the nanny managed to grab her and stop her hand. The girl ordered her to calm down and pull herself together so as not to break even more firewood for herself. Laria tried to turn to the woman and think about how Nocton himself had lived all these years, and whether she had tried to talk to him about what had happened, why she herself had rushed to take revenge and prevent him from living a normal life. Molly was starting to get angry. After all, the words about avenging her sister's life had become just a reason for her. And beating the children and trying to poison one of them was just her own desire for cruelty. Laria asked her to think about how her sister Molly had been living all this time. After all, she hadn't even thought to talk to her, and Maria could have suffered more from the misunderstanding with her sister and her temper. The woman could not stand such psychoanalysis for a long time. She openly declared that she was doing everything only for herself because she considered it her full right. As a girl, she had wasted her precious time on nonsense. So now she would try to make up for the lost opportunity. It hurt her to admit it, but what angered her more was that this very girl had dared to tell her the truth about what had happened. Molly pulled out a knife and held it in front of her. The woman had a wild look and a rather serious look. She accused those present of ruining her life and not giving her the opportunity to live normally. The Archduke grabbed Laria in his arms and protected her from the knife. The woman was rapidly approaching them. One of the cooks, hearing the noise in the kitchen, called the guards, who were to arrive soon and protect the ruler. The servants grabbed the crazy, deranged woman. She resisted and tried to say that she really only wanted the children well, and together with Nocton and his new nanny, they would become monsters like him. Nocton with her last strength, saying that neither he nor his children would know happiness and would suffer and be bored with this world all their lives, without any extra happiness or joy. This dispute ended with the tutor simply being kicked out of the house, and the Archduke himself, although he felt guilty towards her sister, could do nothing at the moment. He was more concerned about the fate of Michael. Still, in the end, he gave Molly monetary compensation and ordered her not to approach the palace again. Otherwise, she would spend the rest of her life in the dungeon of his palace. 2 weeks have passed since then. Laria thought that sending her to her own novel was a fair move. After all, this way she would be able to change a lot for the better and fix the lives of the main characters without unnecessary fuss. But there were no guarantees about what her future would be like. What was scary was that the situation with Molly could happen again. After all, there were so many people offended by the main character of the novel, and they all wanted revenge. The main character, his beloved, was supposed to arrive at this place in about 10 months. So Laria just had to hold out all this time and not become prey for her enemies and foes, or her own family. The girl was sitting in Nocton's room. He offered her a contract for work. All the conditions were spelled out, which did not suit the girl. It could be changed with the consent of the Duke, because he was very grateful to her for saving the little ones. But before she signed the contract, Laria should have known something. Nocton had personally told her that she might witness his seizure. It could cause her mental and physical trauma, harming her. The young man regretted that he should have told them about the contract at the very beginning. But then, he simply did not have the courage to do such a thing, and now he feels guilty. Nocton's voice was a little confused at the end. The girl understood perfectly well that he felt his defect as a serious illness. It would have been very difficult for him to tell an outsider about it, but he opened up to Laria. Because of this flaw, he was despised and feared by others all his life. Behind his back, many people said various nasty things about the young Duke. The girl felt that she had something to say in turn. She said that she went to work for him only because she didn't want to stay in her family's house. She was humiliated and bullied in every way there. Laria told about everything she had to go through there. It was hard to realize that in this world, a girl who was not married remained until the last, the property of her father and brothers. Girls were generally a commodity to be sold at a higher price. The girl said that if Nocton refused to hire her, she would understand his decision about this. The young man replied that he knew it perfectly well, but it was not for nothing that he stood above all laws. And if her family tries to take such a wonderful nanny away from his children, Nocton will be forced to refuse them a nanny that in various ways. He certainly won't allow himself to be deprived of such an opportunity and such a nanny. And, in addition, there was a clause in the contract that emphasized the prohibition of leaving the estate before the end of the agreement. So you shouldn't scatter such personnel just like that. Difficult fate sometimes brings together completely different people. As a result of all this, Laria became a nanny for the children of Nocton. The children really liked their new nanny. They were glad that it was nice to spend time with her. Every day became interesting and filled with new experiences. It was time for a lavish reception at the Archduke's estate. Mary explained that it was a Blackwell tradition at this time of year. There were many guests invited, and the preparations could be very long and stressful. Laria began to recall the details of her novel. According to the plot, the continent was the main leading force in this world. It was ruled by two powerful parties that were at war in every way. One of them was the party of the imperial family. The emperor took over the management of finances and the economy and education. The second party was represented by the Blackwell family. They were responsible for the military department and were supposed to protect the state from the enemy. Due to the fact that their rights and duties are divided, the families maintain a precarious balance of power, preventing unrest from penetrating the state. However, the Blackwell family eventually severed ties with the aristocrats. Over time, they admitted their guilt and short-sightedness in breaking off relations with the nobility and aristocracy of the state. So they began to organize solemn receptions every spring for all who came. The preparation was quite long and responsible. After all, the Blackwells were trying to prove that they had not completely gone wild, but still adhered to the norms and rules of etiquette accepted in secular society. Laria's soul was not very calm. It was an ordinary banquet, but the girl was very worried about it. But later that she guessed why the anxiety did not leave her. The Sherwoods would also be present at the event. The girl was so absorbed in her feelings about her family that she lost sight of many things. She tried not to be distracted, but her faithful maid and designer came to the rescue. Laria had to choose a suitable style of clothing for herself. Her taste really surprised the designer because the dresses that the young girl chose were popular 10 years ago and have become outdated. But she could not go against the will of the customer. But her idea was even embodied in children's clothes. They thought that the nanny was not only a good teacher, but also responsible for her children, over whom she seemed to have custody and protection. Laria's proposal surprised her maid. The girl asked the maid to lend her her uniform for the banquet, but she didn't immediately guess what was the matter and began to protest against such a decision. The day of the banquet came. The children of Nocton came out in droves, and everyone around was simply delighted with these two angels. No one knew their true story, but they sincerely congratulated Blackwell on such beautiful children and wished him everything. Laria watched her children, and the children, in turn, were welcoming and friendly to everyone around them. They didn't want their new nanny to be upset about their upbringing or behavior. The girl herself disguised herself as a servant. After all, she did not want to meet her family now at this reception. Mary helped her mistress transform into a young maid from the house. Before the reception, Laria sat with the children and told them that a reception would be organized soon. And those present must have been pleasantly surprised by how well behaved and polite Nocton's children are, how attentive he is to them. Michael was sure that he would show himself on the positive side, and the girl still did not trust the nanny. Janet was generally hostile towards people, did not trust them, and could not trust anyone. The nanny said that she would always be there and would look after them so that no one would try to offend or humiliate them in any way. If the girl and the boy won the competition, they would receive a prize. The nanny promised to give them any prize they asked for, so Laria asked if the children wanted to play with her. Both were simply delighted with what an interesting game awaited them and what they could expect. The teacher really wanted to be at their reception right now, but it turned out that this time they had to cope on their own. Otherwise, Laria's life could be seriously threatened by troubles from the family. And the kids will have fun at the same time and will be able to cope with adapting to the social environment in a playful way. Her pedagogical influence was very different from what Molly usually did and how she raised them. The girl witnessed a conversation between two young representatives of an aristocratic family who were discussing the well-being of His Majesty. After all, at the moment, it seemed that the Duke was doing well, much well sat. But Laria had even heard that many in the Empire were gossiping about the difficult situation the Archduke was in. But in that case, he definitely wasn't going to organize a reception and welcome the guests. Behind the girl stood a young man who asked to bring him plain water. The girl recognized her older brother by his voice. She did not know what was the right thing to do and how she should behave. Laria replied that she was not responsible for the drinks. The young man asked her to convey his wishes to the one who was in charge of the banquet. After all, it was worth thinking about whether he would recognize her and avoid talking to him. The guy suddenly asked if they had met before because her voice sounded familiar to her. The girl didn't think long and decided that the best way was to throw the tray in her brother's face to get him to stop. The girl ran down the corridor, but the young man didn't lag behind. He followed her and kept his distance so as not to get hurt again by the object that would be thrown. But he couldn't pass up the opportunity to talk either. The young man no longer doubted that before him was his sister, who should be returned home immediately because she had willfully violated his order and his father's instructions. Norman was not far behind. Her brother simply wanted to talk to her so as not to attract too much attention and peacefully convince her that she should return to her parents' house. But the girl disappeared very suddenly. Finally, he noticed that the door to one of the rooms was ajar. Norman guessed that his naughty sister was hiding there. He opened the door, but what happened next shocked him very suddenly and violently. In the room, hidden by darkness, stood Laria and His Majesty, the master of the house, the Duke of Nocton. The young man held the girl by the waist and gently hugged her, trying to kiss and caress her tenderly. This was preceded by the fact that His Majesty the Duke did not feel well in the company. He was bored, and nothing could cheer him up. The young man did not want to be among these people and their empty conversations anymore. One of the guests remarked that his complexion was not very healthy, but Nocton ignored it. He had to listen to their empty chatter all evening, so he needed to get his mind off things. One of the aristocrats said that it was probably because His Majesty was worried about hunting winged mice. However, the grandiose plan developed personally by the Archduke was simply incredible. Nocton asked his interlocutor to be careful with his statements. The latter did not understand the hint and asked if His Majesty really thought that animals would hide in corners if they heard something. The Duke asked the annoying companion if their plan had been exposed last time because he had told too much to outsiders. And that time, it had all failed before it even really started. One of the court ladies interrupted the conversation with the Baron and advised him to get a loving wife before the start of a serious event so that someone would be waiting for him at home and organize a family fire for him. Nocton thought that he was now ready to get rid of all these old foxes with pleasure in order to be alone in peace and quiet, and accordingly not trying to teach anyone anything. Suddenly, he saw Laria running through the corridor and hurrying to the open room. His Majesty became very curious because the girl simply could not hide from anyone because of her good nature. The young man stood up and announced that he was forced to leave the company. He added that he was not going to stay for good reasons. Some people commented that they regretted the young man leaving the company. After that, he quickly grabbed the girl and asked her what she was doing now. She asked him to let her go because it was not customary to just stand in front of a girl and throw yourself at her with arms around her. The young man said that she was actually very ungrateful because he was trying to save her from persecution, and Laria was trying to escape from him as well, thus not thanking the savior from a dangerous pursuer. He leaned over to the girl and asked if she would like to receive a very advantageous offer from him. Without going into details, the young man offered to marry him. Laria looked at him in confusion. Nocton was holding her by the waist. There was a crashing sound outside the door. The girl guessed it was Norman. She didn't want to leave this room, so she had to stay in it with Nocton and not break away from him. The girl emphasized that she didn't really know anything about him, and his proposal seemed really strange. She had, of course, heard a lot about his imminent death and similar gossip. The boy explained that such gossip came from the family of His Majesty the Emperor. After all, they gave birth to a crown prince very early, which cannot be said about the entire Blackwell family and their descendants. It was from that time that rumors began to spread that the young gentleman's mind had gone haywire and that he was losing his mind periodically. The rumors spread from one person to another, and new details were added. The family's unfriendly neighbors were only thinking of overthrowing the family and forcing them to fall before the onslaught of their opponents. The idea behind the marriage was to show society that the Blackwell family was okay. The brother listened in amazement as the Duke persuaded his sister to marry him. But he could not hear the whole conversation, so he made up many things for himself and thought about it further without stopping. The two, who were just getting married, discussed whether the brother would overhear what was being discussed. He thought that everything would be settled when he burst into the room and knocked on the hot couple. Laria firmly decided for herself that she would stay where she was and defend her own opinion and position, because she could be left alone among her relatives, and her end would be tragic and unhappy. The girl understood that Nocton's proposal was more of a businesslike nature, and it wasn't exactly what she was looking for, more like a desire to simply protect herself from other people and unkind people. The Duke said that, in that case, they would now need to play the role of lovers and show everyone that they were enjoying every moment that fate gave them the opportunity to spend together. Laria was surprised by this question. Finally, the door opened in front of Norman. The girl thought that he wouldn't dare touch her when he saw who was standing behind her. She looked at him and said that she had no other choice. Laria said that her beloved Duke would not be happy if she told him about all the suffering caused to her by her relatives and people who seemed close to her at first glance. Norman prevented their next meeting. The guy didn't believe it. He thought she was deliberately trying to mock and ridicule her. After all, she simply didn't want to return to her family and didn't want to surrender to a fair accusation. The brother grabbed her hand and tried to pull her along. He was convinced that the girl would submit to his will, as she had done so many times before. But it didn't happen at all as he had expected. Nocton intervened. He said that no one had the right to do such a thing to his bride on the Duke's own estate. The boy found it hard to believe that Laria was His Majesty's bride. Nocton said he did not want his bride to be treated in this way. As the groom, he stood up for the girl and would not even think of backing down in the face of a guest who had broken the rules of conduct. Norman disagreed. He was convinced that although the couple were married, the girl still belonged to the Sherwood family. She still obeyed her father and brother and had to carry out their orders. The young man did not back down. He insisted that in such delicate matters, one should fully rely on the laws of the empire. After all, the consent of both parties is required for a couple to be considered married and complete. Young Sherwood insisted that without the participation of his family, such a thing was considered invalid until the last moment. Moreover, they did not intend to accept such a son-in-law and did not wish to be related. Meanwhile, in the garden, a young stranger ran up to a tall man wearing a hood. He informed the hooded stranger that everything was going according to plan and they would soon be moving on to phase 2. As the main ceremony continued, they would begin to implement the second phase of their intention. The stranger praised him and ordered them to return to their places and be ready for the coming attack. Laria's own request, His Majesty left her and her brother alone, ostensibly so that she could talk to him. The boy asked for his forgiveness and promised that he would never take her away by force again. The brother asked for only one favor. It seemed strange to the girl because he asked not to talk about the wedding at tonight's dinner. After all, some of the nobles were going to go over to the emperor's side. Norman believes that there may be a hidden extremist killer among the invited guests. He may be acting at the instigation of a group of disgruntled Blackwolf family henchmen, and therefore a betrayal or even murder is being prepared. If they find out that she is the Duke's future bride, who could become the mother of his heir, then something could threaten her health and jeopardize her position in this house. Laria didn't expect this from her brother. For a long time, she believed that he wasn't working for nothing, but for something, and that none of her relatives recognized her as a family member and were going to take care of her. After that, the brother left. He didn't intend to talk to her anymore because the first time she didn't receive him properly. The girl rushed to run away and save her own life from her own brother, whom she didn't trust. For some reason, the girl still found the behavior of her brother strange, who did not spare his time to tell her about this important information regarding the aristocracy that was about to betray His Majesty. But you can rely on Nocton himself in this matter. After all, the Duke did not do anything just like that. He was going to do this even earlier. His every step was planned, and the girl was to be part of his plan. But now she simply could not help but share important information regarding the fact that there may be people in the estate who wish harm to its owner. So it was worth talking to Nocton about it. She inadvertently asked him what he thought if, in some case, robbers and traitors broke into his palace and plotted something evil against him and his close friends and relatives. The young man asked if this was really what his brother had told her, considering it a great secret and a great secret. After all, what kind of master would Nocton be if he didn't know that a traitorous rat had settled in his house? The Duke said that he had long known about the presence of the traitors, but had skillfully kept it a secret, giving them a chance to continue their plan, confident that everything was fine with them. The conspirators had no idea that they had outwitted themselves. They had fallen into a trap they had dug for themselves and would soon fall into. Laria guessed that her master had specifically allowed the conspirators to enter the ball. Noctoe said that he did not need to worry about safety because the family's knights had mixed with the guests and were now among the conspirators, ready at any moment to attack the enemy and neutralize the enemies. The girl was worried that the children might get hurt in the fight, but these words angered the Duke. He asked who she took him for and why she reacted to his actions in such a way, considering them pranks. To prove his point and convince the girl that her suspicions were unfounded, the young man suggested going to the banquet hall and seeing everything there firsthand, making sure they weren't risking anything. The appearance of the girl in the company of the Duke caused a lot of talk. No one could understand who this charming girl was next to His Majesty. This appearance became the reason for even more gossip and reflection. The guests agreed that she would try to raise her status in society at the expense of her husband. That's what a woman's desire to secure her future could mean. No one said anything good about the couple. But the most offensive were the words that the girl's father must have sold her and given her away for a profit. But others objected, believing that the girl was simply thrown away because she was really stupid and no one needed her. Finally, they reached the middle of the hall, where they saw the little ones. They ran joyfully to their nurse. In the meantime, the servant reported to the Duke how everything was going on in the estate. But the children interrupted the whole conversation with joyful cries. But now she was worried about how to get the children out of the palace without being noticed. There could be many attackers hiding in all this crowd. And she was also thinking about how Nocton would identify the traitors among them. High-ranking society in his house every spring. He did not ignore his enemies either. The guy asked if everyone who dared to side with his enemies really believed those rumors that spoke of his cruel treatment of his servants and his cruelty to all living things. Nocton asked permission to reveal the whole truth about the Blackwell family, to dispel doubts about his adequacy and his true position in society. The young man asked Laria to help him with this. He approached her and asked everyone present if he had really gone crazy. Would he be able to love such a beautiful woman as his current fiancée? The girl did not expect such a reaction from him and was very confused, but the shock of the guests was even greater. No one thought that he would marry the daughter of the Sherwood family. The girl saw the faces of her stepmother and her foolish son after this announcement. The older brother was not happy that his advice was simply ignored, and the Duke, meanwhile, was crucifying himself in front of everyone about their mutual unearthly love and the enemy's attempts to prevent this union from taking place between the couple. After that, all the guests began to chant toasts and congratulations to the newlyweds. It turned out that there were no enemies at this celebration. Everyone skillfully feigned joy and readiness to help and come to the aid of the couple and Nocton personally. The girl, meanwhile, watched the people's reactions. Their facial expressions changed like in a movie. It was hard to tell who was really thinking what, and it was hard to tell what their true feelings were. But not everyone was happy. But among all the guests, one man caught her attention, whose expression she didn't like the most. He looked like this, as if the best event of his life had just happened. And all the time, he silently looked up with a smile. Laria quickly realized what was about to happen. A healthy chandelier hung above her and the Duke, and it was now that it began to fall, cut by someone specifically to kill His Majesty and his new passion right in front of the guests. The girl managed to push the Duke away with a sharp movement so that he would not be hurt. After all, in this situation, his life was much more important than her own. But fortunately, the young man pulled her along, keeping her from a rash act. Both were now on the floor, shocked by what had happened. But Laria had more. She was now losing consciousness and was already delirious, begging the Duke to take care of the children because they had to grow up to be normal people. While Nocton was next to Laria and trying to provide first aid, a stranger approached them from behind, brandishing a stiletto specifically to complete his deed, which the girl prevented by reacting unexpectedly. Approached Nocton, who was holding Laria in his arms. He asked, "How is his master feeling and what should be done next?" After all the guests are now trying to leave the palace. The Duke ordered his guards to arrest everyone he had previously told the chief of security about. Thus, A group of aristocrats who were considered his loyal vassals were detained on various charges. His once loyal subjects, who were supposed to set an example for everyone around him, treacherously turned against him. But the worst thing was that their plot could seriously harm his family, including his children and Lady Sherwood. Nocton addressed everyone present. He reminded them that they should think very carefully before saying something about another person and trying to label them with something unpleasant and bad. You should always trust your own eyes and think carefully before taking any action. You should also listen to your heart because only it can tell you what is the right thing to do in any situation. After this speech, all the servants of the family knelt down and bowed to the current ruler. They promised to remain loyal to him and be loyal subjects for the rest of their lives. When the girl came to her senses in her room, she immediately saw her family nearby. She did not expect to see them and therefore was very surprised by this. The girl did not really want to see them nearby. She asked if she could find out what they were all doing in her room. The eldest son asked how she dared to tarnish the family's reputation and honor in such a reckless way without telling anyone. The girl was told that she could bring further shame to her family, as she did not even know the basic rules of etiquette and behavior in the upper echelons of society. So she had to be educated accordingly. Even the father intervened. He ordered his eldest son to prepare the crew and Laria to prepare to return to her native home. The girl did not expect something like this to happen. She could not allow it. Janet was standing at the door. She was preventing the adults from leaving the room. But her real goal was not simply to prevent the adults from leaving the room. The girl would not let her nanny go with them.